As a lifer entering my 12th and final year here at Selwyn House, I'd like to start by thanking all the Selwyn House administrators, teachers, and staff, especially Mr. Hannaford and Mr. Downey. They've not only respected, but also encouraged and supported me as an Indigenous person within our school. I'd also like to thank Ms. Prieur and Mr. Deegan for supporting the creation of the Indigenous Student Committee, where we work to recognize and celebrate Indigenous history, peoples, and current issues. Their leadership has made our school such a great place to learn and grow. As a representative of the ISC, I'm here today to invite all of you to join us in commemorating Orange Shirt Day on Wednesday, September 30th. Orange Shirt Day began in 2013 as an opportunity to create meaningful discussion about the effects of residential schools and the legacy colonization has left behind. The initiative calls for every Canadian to wear an orange shirt on September 30th in the spirit of healing, reconciliation through education. Beyond wearing an orange shirt, the initiative is to commemorate the devastating residential school experiences and to honor the healing journey of the survivors, their families, and communities. September 30th was chosen as the day of commemoration because early fall was historically when the Government of Canada took Indigenous children away from their families and sent them to residential schools where they were to be cleansed of their culture, language, and identity. For over 150 years, the government and church partnered to commit one of the worst cultural genocides in history. Over generations, children as young as 5 years old were psychologically, sexually, and physically abused, and many never survived. You may ask yourself what motivated the government to commit the many atrocities against Indigenous peoples, including residential school. When I assess the past, it all seems to come down to one issue: land. Settlers to North America needed to eradicate Indigenous people so that they could gain unlimited access to our homeland and prosperity that it generated. Over several generations, they used propaganda, genocide, then colonization to make us go away. Thankfully, we could not be ethnically cleansed, and we are still here. 500 years of genocide has taken its toll on our nations, and it will take time to heal and fully regenerate. We commemorate this dark and painful history because the truth matters. It is important for all Canadians to know the true history of this country so that we can ensure colonization stops and the sovereignty of Indigenous peoples of North America is fully recognized. Building relationships based on mutual respect will create a better future for all. Orange Shirt Day is merely the beginning of how we as a Selwyn House community are moving towards a more honest, diverse, informed, and inclusive future.
My Mohawk name is Agwardonde, and it means the branch that holds up the tree.
My name is Tirata Diomdir. Tirata is a Gunyak Gahaga name. It stands for I'm always moving and always doing things and always being productive.
My Mohawk name is Runidu Gutste. It means fighting spirit.
My great-grandfather, his name was Tirata, so my parents felt that I should also have that name.
They gave it to me because my great grandfather had the name Agwardonde, so they named it. My mom named me after him.
When I was born, the doctor told my mom I wasn't supposed to be alive. So when I came out of the womb, my mom thought of that name because my mom thought I wouldn't make it.
Being Indigenous to me is showing that I am responsible for showing people my culture.
I almost have to be like a role model to when I'm out in public in like Montreal or Sherbrooke, like I have to set an example for people in my town, it feels like to me.
Well, not many people know my culture. If I would walk up to some person on Sherbrooke and say, hey, what do you know about the Ugwehua or the Iroquois Nation? And they're probably gonna say either something they learned in the history books or they wouldn't know anything at all.
Because some people don't see a lot of people from Ganawage, so I think I need to set an example so how like the community like acts or like the way they behave.
And I find that because I'm Native and I know a few other people that are Native, that I can answer that, and I find that's nice that I get to answer questions and tell people that something they wouldn't normally know.
Being Indigenous makes me feel grounded by my ancestors who have been connected to this land for thousands of years before me. I feel proud that despite the atrocities that our nations have faced and the hundreds of years filled with difficulties, all related to genocide and colonization, that we have persevered.
My identity and my culture, I find that I feel happier that I'm unique, that I'm not like every other person who's from Montreal or someone from Europe. I feel like I'm happy that I'm from here.
The residential school system was put in place by the Canadian government in collaboration with religious institutions to rid Indigenous children of their culture, their language, and their identity as Indigenous people.
Native Americans were taken and put into so they could learn the ways of people in like Europe that came across seas.
And bring them to these schools to de-Indigenous them, to make them more like a white person. To make them to forget their culture, to make them Christian and stuff like that.
And learn English and get stripped of all their things that they learned growing up in their community.
They would usually do it by force. It has a very, very high mortality rate. Several thousand kids died.
And over the 160 years that these schools were in place, hundreds of thousands of children that were on record were taken, thousands never returned, thousands not even accounted for, and generations of families to this day would never be the same.
And a lot of people nowadays are still feeling the effects. Some survivors are still alive, and I've met some, and they don't want to talk about it because of how much of a disturbing experience it was.
All schools were dangerous places for Indigenous children. My own father and grandparents and great-grandparents were all abused in both residential school and day schools. And it is going to take a lot of truth, healing, and justice to set things right.
I find that Orange Shirt Day is important to me because it will tell everyone that there is an Indigenous presence here at Selwyn House.
It's a great opportunity to educate everyone on the true history of Indigenous people in North America.
Like if people like come up to me, like sure I'll teach them it, but like it's also good to do your own research at home, like on your computer, and like really dig if you're so interested in it, because I find it's very interesting and the information is almost endless.
Indigenous history, culture, language, and traditions are awesome and deeply connect us to the land. Though our ways are ancient, they can help us find more balance and respect and peace in today's world.
I like the Orange Shirt Day concept because it'll teach people who aren't as familiar with Indigenous culture or Indigenous peoples in Canada and maybe some places elsewhere that they might not know of as many of these things.
It's great to spread awareness of like Indigenous things, because a lot of people you would hear about the Holocaust. Everyone knows about that, right? To me, it's almost the same thing with Orange Shirt Day and residential schools, but it's not as well known.
I feel a responsibility that gives me strength and that I could carry on the legacy and vision in Selwyn House. It gives me strength also to think of how proud my ancestors would be to know that I would be continuing education throughout private schools. To be Indigenous is to be grounded in thousands of years of interesting and beautiful traditions, knowledge, and connections.
So that's why I want to get the Orange Shirt Day here so everyone could know and maybe tell their families and then on and on.